Welcome to But Her Lyrics, the show where we delve into the political lyrics of songs I like, songs I wrote, or topics that I think should be a song. I'm Shawna Potter, singer and lyricist for War on Women, and your host. Big trigger warning for this episode. Here is your warning. Warning, 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 warning. We're going to be talking about violence generally, but more specifically, we will be talking about sexual assault, abuse, rape, and murder. Luckily, we're in good hands because later I'll be chatting with Angelus Evans, the manager of community engagement and training at TurnAround, Inc., which is a Baltimore-based rape crisis center. She's going to talk to us about her work and give us concrete ways to help our friends when they're experiencing violence, which is kind of what the song we're focusing on today is about. It's called Killer by Palehound, and in the lyrics, a friend of the singer-songwriter Elle has opened up about experiencing sexual violence, and Elle just wants to help, but is willing to go to extremes to do so. So before we talk about all things violence and non-violence, Patreon! Patreon! This episode sponsors our First Offense Krav Maga, kind of fitting, in Virginia, and Pupcakes and Pastries. Their links will be in the show description. Shout out to my badass recruit, Melissa P. on Patreon. You can sign up as a recruit on my Patreon if you want an official sponsor shout out on the show. You'll also get a copy of my book for free and get to make random and weird requests. Why not? Head to patreon.com/Shawna Potter to see everything else you get at any of the 6 available support tiers. And I'm going to use this moment as a reminder for my patrons to message me to schedule one of those one-on-one calls or those shout-outs. All right, let's do this. This is a big episode. Take breaks if you need to, and text HOME to 741-741 if you need to talk to a mental health professional right away. You can also call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE or 7233. Interview time! Okay, well, Elle, thank you so much for joining me on But Her Lyrics. Please introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, I am Elle. I play in Palehound, and I use they, she pronouns, and I live in New York. I don't know what else to introduce myself.
That's pretty good. That's relevant to what we're doing. Yeah, well, we're here to talk about your song Killer, which is on the album Black Friday, which came out in 2019, right?
Yeah, it did.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's it about?
Yeah, Killer. I mean, for this podcast, you kind of asked for like a more, I would say, like political song was maybe the word you'd used. And I feel like my political songs are not necessarily like they don't really take the form of like protest songs that are like overtly about like politics as a subject, or stuff like that. Not that I love music like that. But I personally find my politics like in my own kind of stories from my life. So this story is of a very close friend of mine who just a few years ago opened up to me about their history with sexual violence. And, this is a conversation that I feel like a lot of people have with their friends who are, women or non-binary people, queer people, anyone really is just, I feel like the amount of conversations I've had like this with people I love is endless. So it's not really about this necessarily only this specific person, but just the song is just kind of my anger and frustration that so many people I love have had to go through assault and abuse in their lives. And this one came from a specific friend of mine opening up to me about their story. But, this was just a feeling and a sentiment I'd had for a while, which is like, I want to kill these guys who are doing this shit to people I love and me and, people. Yeah.
So it is a true story. And like you say, that it kind of is about how you you're offering to kill these folks and get them out of your friend's life. Has your friend heard the song?
Yes.
Do you know how they feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first played it for them, it was really emotional, and I think it was something that I was nervous to show them at first because I was kind of like, this feels like it could be out of bounds to like write a song about someone else's deep trauma and the way that it affects me, but I wanted to do it in a way that was so clear that the way it affects me is because it affects them. And
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
kind of one of those friends that wants to beat the shit out of anyone who wrongs someone I love. So that's kind of what the vibe was. And I went into it and I was like, listen, I don't have to release this song. I don't have to do anything with the song. I just wanted you to know that I have it. And it's about this and it's about you. And they, we cried about it and they were, I think, grateful for it.
That's so lovely that you ran it by them and said like that you don't, got their consent basically to put it out in the world in order to avoid potentially re-traumatizing them if it's something that they weren't comfortable with. That's great.
Yeah, I would never put something out without someone's consent that had to do with that. And any kind of, anything like that, I would never do without someone's consent because consent is the issue at hand in the first place.
um, do you often write kind of true story narrative style lyrics, or is Killer an outlier in that sense?
No, I always do. I feel like I have always, just since I've started writing songs, I've written from my own personal experience. And, I've tried to kind of be someone who writes stories about other people. And I've tried that in the past. And I have succeeded at times, or I've tried to write about maybe a setting instead of a person,
Mm.
or a feeling instead of a person, or like a true story of mine. But everything really does circle back to my experience because it's the only thing I feel smart enough to talk about.
You're an expert on it. That's true. When listening to this song and listening to your other songs too, I felt like this one sounds pretty haunting, which I think really does match the subject matter. Even though you're angry, you're still talking about, murder and like planning this murder and like helping this person in that way. How conscious of this mood were you while writing the song?
Very, well, I mean, the way that I write songs is that it's very rare that I sit down with a guitar and write a guitar part and then start writing lyrics for that guitar part.
Okay. How's it normally go?
So I usually do things really separately where I have like a ton of voice memos on my phone that are all, guitar riffs or me singing like really weird melodies. And I kind of do like a puzzle, like mix everything up. So I'd had this guitar part written and I was like, ooh, this is really like kind of haunting, but also in this like cowboy way. And
Mm.
and I had it kind of sitting and I was like, I like how this riff sounds, but it needs a very specific subject. And then, these lyrics came to me. And I was like, actually, these lyrics would really work well with that part that I was playing because I was kind of thinking like, oh, the combination of like this kind of haunted country-ish guitar part with these lyrics could make for a real like Kill Bill moment.
Mhm.
And I was kind
Mhm.
of not to be that, that bitch that's like write something inspired by Kill Bill because that's kind of basic. But, you know, it was a little basic, but kind of was running with like the Nancy Sinatra, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Vigilante vibe.
Yeah, like I can tell you're angry, but it's like a calm, collected, cold anger, you know?
Right, because it's the anger after the first burst of anger, right? So I think
Mm.
like I wrote this song not in the heat of my anger where I'm like, fuck this, oh, sorry, I don't even know if I can swear on this.
Fuck yeah, you can. Don't worry about
Okay, cool, cool.
it.
Because it takes me a while to process things to write about them. Like it's very rare that I'll be in a moment where I'm experiencing something and then I'll write immediately, right? So usually when
Okay.
I write a song, I've had time to reflect on the subject. And so this song does kind of take place in that moment after the original, like, fuck, fuck, fuck moment where I'm like, okay, I know I'm really pissed, but now I'm going to do something about it. And so that's what the song's about. It's just kind of like what the moment after I processed just like this subject and was like, what could I possibly do about it? And then started like fantasizing about revenge. So that's kind of where the song takes place in my own journey with certain information, I guess. I'm sad too, you know.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it before, but I want to dig into it a little bit. I my band also has kind of a thought experiment song about killing all men, and it sounds very angry. But personally, I'm like 97% anti-violence
Yeah.
in my life and how I work, towards the goal of a violence-free world. How do your views on the consequences of violence and justice differ or align with the point of view kind of put forward in this song?
Oh man. I mean, it kind of aligns. Not to sound like not at the risk of sounding, bad. I kind of, the song is about, kind of my weapon in the backseat.
Lyric reference.
I try not to say gun specifically in the song because I don't want to be like me and my gun running around shooting
I
people.
actually didn't assume it was necessarily a gun.
Exactly. So it could be anything. So, but in terms of like, I don't know. I think sometimes even though I would love to believe in an anti-violence world and I want to be there 100%, and I have been there in the past, I've always kind of, in the past, I was like, why, stoop to that level, and we don't need violence and we don't need that. But I think over the past few years, I've kind of developed this feeling of like, well, if violence is going to be happening, if these people are going to be violent, then, fighting it with what, not being the peaceful one in the face of violence sometimes also is valuable, to be violent back, frankly. And I think that's some for some people the only way that they can be communicated with is through violence back to them, or else they don't face consequences. And so I know that this sounds kind of bad possibly, but no, do I wish that I could like maybe not kill this guy, but like deeply mess him up? 100%. If I could right now, I would. Sorry, but I would. I feel like I'm not being politically correct on saying that I would.
Hey, I mean, honestly,
I choose violence sometimes.
the 3% of me that is okay with violence is the percentage that realizes that as an individual, I maybe cannot be in a position to judge another individual who has experienced violence, and if they want to retaliate because of their own personal oppression, like who am I to say no, don't?
Right.
Right. So like I get it, but writing a song and wanting to like kill this dude, even like just fantasizing about it, obviously it doesn't help our friends in the moment. So what did you find was helpful to support your friend, or what resources did you point to your friend that maybe you could share with listeners in case one of their friends comes to them with a story?
That's a hard one. That's hard to be like tips or tricks, to overcoming severe trauma. I don't really.
Maybe so. Sorry.
I'm not to call you out on it, but I just mean like, I don't really have tips and tricks for that. I think like what I have for that is just constant access to my resources. With when people tell me that is like, well, I'm always here. I know that like what I can do is that if you ever need to talk or scream or anything, and if you want to talk to me and not get an opinion, if you want to talk to me and get an opinion, like I know what I can offer you as a support system, as someone who will listen to you and believe you and provide you with a space to do that. Obviously, I'm always trying to tell people to be in therapy. I'm always trying to tell people to find community around their trauma, and maybe try to find support groups or find, just the plethora of things that you can find. But also, I feel like it's hard for me to just tell people what to do when I have not had that specific experience and I don't know what's best for them. I think that's just why I'm kind of like, this is what I can offer you as a friend, and I will do anything that can help you through this. And I'll hear about resources and stuff and point people in different directions, but I don't have like a list of things or anything go-tos.
No, but you have Google, and just the fact that you're saying that you'll be there and how do you want me to show up? I think that is actually great advice for anyone listening. That's the first thing, is just to say that I'm here. What do you need?
I'm not a therapist, so I'm never going to pretend to be the person that knows how to, fully address certain people's trauma. Like I'm never going to be like, do this, do that. I know what you should do. I know how you should act. So I think that's kind of where I always am aware, is like, I'm not going to diagnose you. I'm not going to like try to treat you. I'm just going to be here for you to like yell at or scream at or cry at or anything. Like that's why I'm here.
I think that's an invaluable role to play for someone. I think that's perfect. Switching gears a little bit, I noticed that you have some newer singles on Bandcamp. I didn't see them on Spotify? Like, is there a story there? Is there something going? Am I missing something?
No, I don't think you're. Well, are you? I don't know. Am I missing? What songs in particular?
I don't know. And maybe we'll cut this because it's nothing.
No, it's okay. I think there are some songs. Well, there's that song "How Long," but that should be on Spotify. And then I did an Autumn Sweater cover, and that should also be on Spotify. Can't think of what's on my Bandcamp that wouldn't be on my Spotify at this point.
Well, maybe the right thing to say is where can people find your music? When you tell everyone where to find your music and where to find you. And,
yeah. I mean, I'm on Instagram and I'm updating that with shows and stuff mostly in terms of if you wanted to follow like where calendar stuff is or if I'm releasing something. That's definitely my main platform of communicating with people. But I mean, I always encourage people to listen or buy off Bandcamp first because, you know, as much as I want to be like, listen on Spotify, playlist on Spotify, which I do. And if you have that, that's great. I have Spotify, whatever. We're all playing the game that they are making us play. But I do like to recommend Bandcamp still because that is a way better platform and is much fairer to artists and isn't like evil like Spotify is.
Exactly.
Frankly.
Well, Elle, I know that you have a busy day ahead of you and I also have to run to something, but it has been amazing to talk with you about this song. I think a lot of people can absolutely identify with the feeling of being so angry that someone would hurt their friend, family member, partner, and not knowing where to put those feelings. And, you know, how lucky are we that we get to put them into songs?
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for chatting with us today. All right. Bye, Elle.
Cool. See you later.
Big thanks to Elle from Palehound for chatting about some vulnerable and real shit. That's one of the things I love about songwriting. It provides this extra layer of protection when talking about hard things. You know, I can hide a little bit behind the loud music or the performance of it all. And the fact that not every lyric has to be 100% autobiographical to make it a good song. So I appreciate you, Elle, and every other songwriter I've interviewed for potentially putting yourself in a vulnerable position, removing that little layer of protection. Thank you for being so open about your feelings. All right, next up, my chat with Angelus from TurnAround, who shared a bunch of resources with me after our interview, national numbers and websites and chat lines, so I'll put them in the show notes. But keep listening to hear about the amazing work she does, how prevention really is key, and how we can respond to a friend in need. Interview time! Angelus Evans, thank you so much for joining me on But Her Lyrics. In this episode, we are breaking down a song called Killer by an artist called Palehound, which is kind of about wanting to protect your friend that has experienced harm or intimate partner violence through the use of violence and revenge. So before we take our deep dive into the song or about those topics, describe what TurnAround is, what you do there, and introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Angelus Evans, and I currently serve as TurnAround's Prevention, Education, and Training Manager. TurnAround, we are a Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and newly Howard County-based nonprofit that provides wraparound services to those who have been impacted by issues of human trafficking, sexual assault, as well as intimate partner violence. So our services can really stem from anything from clinical therapy, case management, legal advocacy, prevention education, and a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week crisis helpline. Mm-hmm. And probably the most important thing to note is that all of our services are free to the survivors and those supporting survivors that we serve.
Amazing. Amazing. So let's get the basics out of the way. What is intimate partner violence, or IPV? Who's affected by it? Give us the rundown.
Yeah, so IPV, I think oftentimes is used interchangeably with the term domestic violence. So you'll find some definitions out there where they'll say, oh, intimate partner violence is a form of domestic violence, or you'll find folks making very clear distinctions between the two. Domestic violence historically have been attributed to those one who are married, and those who are often heterosexual, and those who are often living and sharing the same home. Intimate partner violence really opens up that definition in terms of folks who may be in relationships that are currently dating or formerly dating, and they don't have to necessarily live together. They again, they don't have to necessarily be in an active relationship, and it kind of encompasses all forms of abuse. So if you hear terminologies like physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, it encompasses all of those things. It's interesting because intimate partner violence, again, kind of steering away from that word of domestic violence, CDC even qualifies it as like a public health issue, that it is something, it is something that they address very aggressively, and organizations like TurnAround, we kind of do the work of carrying it as such. So it's very broad, and as far as who it affects everyone. I think that when we are breaking this down more, if we weren't being so basic, it affects people. It shows up in different ways, especially as given the topic today, how people seek out support and help in those spaces. Depending on how they're showing up in this world, it may show up a lot different, but it really does affect anyone of any socioeconomic status, any religious group, any cultural group, male identifying, woman identifying. Yeah, so it really plays out across ages and everything.
In the song Killer by Palehound, Elle, the singer, is sort of taking it upon themselves to help an abused friend by, quote, killing the man who hurt you.
Yeah.
And I believe the desire for revenge, that anger is very human, you know, and it can feel like protecting our loved ones or ourselves to engage in it. But it's my understanding that enacting revenge upon an abuser usually ends up hurting the victim.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? And if so, how does that usually play out?
Well, I definitely don't want to speak from the perspective of someone who doesn't identify as a survivor, as far as if it doesn't, like feel a certain way for that person. Speaking for TurnAround, I mean, our mission is to end violence of every form, although we work with these very specific type of folks who have been harmed. But the repercussions of any type of justice that you are seeking after you have been abused, there will be repercussions of that. I know at TurnAround, our work is very much survivor centered, as far as folks making those decisions for themselves of what justice looks like, what healing looks like, what empowerment looks like. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you murder someone, that is against the law. So the survivor, however they are feeling actually about an act such as that, or someone who's supporting the survivor, it is they're going to have repercussions of that, because it's the law, it's the way of the land, it is the way that we operate as a society. However, that I think that, particularly coming from that perspective of someone who's supporting the survivor, that's even more interesting, because this is the song is written from this lens of someone who's supporting the survivor, not the actual survivor. So one thing that we have to be mindful of as we're showing up for survivors is centering their decision-making in that. When you experience something like sexual assault, when you experience something like intimate partner violence, there is a taking away of your power. So
Yes.
when you're supporting someone, you really have to play this role. And if you are committing to joining this journey in some form of letting that person find their power again. So doing something on someone's behalf, that's like the first alarming thing, because they've already had that taken away from them in so many various forms, right?
Right. They might not want you to go beat someone up for
Exactly.
them. Yeah. So when we show up, if a friend confides in us about experiencing IPV, it sounds like we want to center what their needs and wants are. What are some other basics? Like, what if they don't know what they want or need? Like, what do we do to help someone who confides in us? And what do we do?
Yeah, I think that's that last part that you said. Sometimes they don't know, and I think that's the hardest part, because oftentimes someone who's experienced something like intimate partner violence, some form of abuse, they don't have the answers, and you are sitting there thinking, I don't have the answers either. But you may just be a little bit quicker to kind of think of some, just because, again, you aren't the one who directly experienced the harm. So you kind of want to offer that up very quickly. But really, it is in the art is really in the listening, and listening actively. And you think that something as simple as saying, I hear you, something as simple as saying, thank you for telling me, thank you for sharing, seems really vague and lackluster. It doesn't feel like initiative, but it really is power in that. And I think you have to know it's a journey, right? It is really a journey. I read recently someone speaking about grief, and they were saying, because particularly with abuse, there is a sense of a loss of self. So that is a form of grief too, right? And someone said that I read that someone noted that time doesn't heal grief. Grief just changes, right? So I think it made me think about healing, and healing with folks who experience this. Healing may not have an end game. It just changes along the way. And I think it starts with that very first share, right? It really does start right there, as far as how you shared this very personal, shameful, guiltful thing. And now what are the little blocks that just are kind of getting you back to changing, to feel somewhat like someone who can actually deal and move forward, knowing that this has been an experience that they've had.
In my work, I wrote a book called Making Spaces Safer. I teach bystander intervention, and I train people to create safer spaces wherever they go. And so that, it's on that spectrum of preventing and responding to violence for sure. And so I get all kinds of questions in my trainings about all kinds of stuff that I usually feel like I'm not qualified to answer, especially when it comes to more like intimate partner violence or transformative justice. It's just kind of not my expertise. But I think the tips I give most often are, just acknowledging like the way that you respond to someone disclosing can affect how they process the rest of their healing. So if you're just listening and you're caring and you're warm and you're not trying to talk over them or offer solutions right away, but really just being there to listen and validate how they feel, that will go a long way on their path to healing. And it does feel small in the moment. It does feel like you're not doing anything, but it really makes a huge impact in the long run. But I think where people get tripped up then is, well, what do I do if I suspect someone is experiencing IPV? They didn't disclose to me, but I think maybe they're in trouble. What do I do that won't harm them even further or bring attention onto it? I don't know if you can hear my dog. She's straight up licking herself.
I can't.
Okay, well, that's great.
I think we're good. Okay,
I assume any kind of pandemic person that's ever been on Zoom will understand what's happening. But just in case it made it through, regular podcast listeners are used to it. All right, so what do people do if they suspect someone is experiencing IPV?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind as you were kind of bringing that in is just some of the things. I get this question a lot from parents who think that their children are in some type of unhealthy relationship. And I think particularly when you suspect it, especially if it's a friend or something like that, and there's a rapport there, hopefully there's already a dynamic of communication and sharing and comfortability that you can really build upon. And I always kind of recommend not to go straight to the thing, but try to kind of go around it and get an idea through more ambiguous questions, maybe a lot lines of questioning and genuine concern of trying to get a feel on whether your feelings are correct as far as that suspicion and that thinking that something may be happening. But I think that just asking, playing, and one of the things that I really love to do actually is play off of current events, like current relationship dynamics, and getting people to kind of get talking about those types of things.
Like a celebrity relationship or something, and be like, that was kind of weird, right? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I didn't go into like what I specifically do at TurnAround, but my work is deeply rooted in prevention education. So this is working a lot of times with youth, so young people who are developing relationships and really trying to identify what their boundaries are, what they want, how they identify love and affection and all of those things. And I mean, one of a great facilitation activity is just like taking current, very open relationships and kind of breaking those down. Like, what are you deeming healthy here? What are you deeming unhealthy here? I think that exposing them to communities like TurnAround could be a very indirect way to say like, oh, I know this organization, or hey, do you want to follow us on social media? Follow this. Like, I saw this today, sharing it via DM.
Let's go volunteer. Let's go to an event. Yeah.
Any of those types of things, right? Like, and then just again, still being in that space though of actively listening. So when there is a window that it's been created there, just kind of taking that opportunity to name what you're at least observing and seeing, and checking in to see how that person feels about that, and what they want to do, like asking if they need help in some type of way, asking if you could do some more trips to their homes or where they're holding space with their partner, and stuff like that, sharing materials, even indirectly. They watch your stories on Instagram all the time. Start sharing these things, right? You're always talking to somebody on there. Right. So you're not just always sharing it for yourself. So there are a lot of ways I think you kind of do that. I think you have to really check in with your own comfort level on whether you want to be super clear and name something. I think there's definitely also a dynamic of kind of assessing the level of danger someone is in, right? So like if you actively saw a partner hit their partner, that is another conversation other than these ambiguous questions and sharing things on social media and taking windows. That is something to name, but still actively listen, believe and validate, and ask the person how they kind of want to move forward after not only they've experienced it, but you in turn may have even witnessed this in some form or fashion as well.
Yeah, I think, letting people know that you're there to help, even if they don't want to take your help right away.
Exactly.
Is really important. Just maintain that you're there, and then not going in hot and being like, hey, leave my friend alone, because you don't know what people are doing behind closed doors after you leave. And so you want to not make it worse for them after you leave that place.
Right. And definitely educating yourself on some best approaches of how to support someone in that way. And and spending some time on how you are processing what's happening. Because again, you care and love for someone, that shows up for you in certain ways as well. Also, I think it's really hard to name too when you do not feel like you are the best person to support someone. I think that's something too that people are oftentimes kind of circling around. It's like, I actually have a personal investment in this. I've actually had this, my own experience, and I cannot be triggered or alarmed in this way. But being comfortable with how you're going to leave that situation, whether that's just like, I'm sharing this resource, it's not something that I can talk about any longer, or this is a boundary that I really have to set. Like, I want you to know that I'm here to help, but it's not something that I can continue to have conversations about. It is not something that I feel as though I'm the best person to support you in this, because I have a lot of feelings of how I would want to handle it, but I really want to value and respect the way you want to move forward.
Let's take a breather. Let's take a breather. If someone in our community is accused of rape or abuse or intimate partner violence, ideally, what does justice look like? Or what are our options? Especially when many victims are from groups that traditionally do not trust the legal system to
Mhm.
keep them safe, people of color, trans and non-binary people, disabled people, immigrants, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. And I'm sort of also thinking about this from my community, my point of view, which is kind of like punk rock music community of a lot of times I think people just try to run abusers out of town, get out of here. And then they just go on to another town and do the
Yeah.
same thing. So not that, right? But what are our options to actually get justice and change behavior?
Yeah, I think our options always start, and this is not just because I am a prevention education
You're
fanatic.
biased.
Yeah, because I'm totally biased.
Yeah, same.
It really does start in these preventive measures. I am a strong. I do this work under this lens that I am here to um, implement preventive strategies through this lens that hopefully you are giving people the knowledge and the tools to want to change their own lives and communities, to want to find their own healing methods and what feels like justice for them, and also for them to share their own stories at their own times and their own willingness. So I think that it can start. Our ways to address this can really start in prevention of it never happening in the first place, and really holding space to have conversations like we're having today, right? To take a song and unpack that and talk about what it means for people and everyone involved as is described, right? But I don't know if there's an ideal, right? I definitely don't think there's an ideal, because when you're talking about things like our justice systems and the way folks show up in that system, it has its flaws, right? So we're talking about a lot when we even say that.
Right,
We're not
right.
just talking about someone who's been assaulted in some way and now is seeking out justice, but we're talking about a lot of social issues by just naming that one thing.
Yeah.
I think that, again, you want to center it around the survivor's choice and what feels good for them. I think, again, the traditional route is that this person would go to court, and the survivor would have their time in court where they can go in and feel really great about sharing their story. And then that person is punished in some way, right? And they're kept from being able to harm another person. That could look like justice for someone. There's a terminology, restorative justice, that's used a lot around our work, where again it's really centered around a survivor's choice of how they want to seek out justice. And that can really look like a lot of things. It could look like supportive circles. It could look like being on community reparation boards. It can look like victim impact panels. It can look like having victim offender dialogue, which is something that is like a lot, right? And for those who are listening who don't know what I'm talking about there, but it's like, it is when a victim actually wants to sit down with their perpetrator and have a conversation about what they experience when they had that experience with them, right? It can look like sharing circles, but it really does overall. I think if I thought about the most ideal situation, it would be living in a community where everyone has a personal investment in how we support survivors and how we prevent violence in the first place.
I
So
love that.
yeah, so I think that that's really where I landed with that I was really tossing around with that question. And I think that is just some of the ways, but it definitely is no ideal way of this, because the ideal would be that no one would experience this in the first place.
Right. And we can keep working towards that.
Yeah.
How has the Me Too movement affected your work, for better or worse? It's been a few years. Have you seen any changes?
it definitely affects our work as an agency. I want to normalize conversations around unhealthy relationship dynamics, around issues of sexual assault, intimate partner violence, human trafficking, because the more that we actually normalize having the conversations, the more likely people are to name their abusive experiences. So the Me Too movement, it is that. It is like, it is a calling out. It is a naming, and you have people inspired by that. You have people who really struggle about the methods of which that movement has moved. Even when you say the Me Too movement, there's also a lot of things about who have been the faces of those, of that movement, right? So again, you're saying one thing, but you're saying a lot. and that means different things for different people, right? So I think it helps. Overall, that's a personal take. I think that agency wise, I think it informs the work, right? Because just like any type of work that anyone's doing is going to change with the times. It's going to evolve, hopefully, and it's going to keep being pushed forward. So yeah, it definitely has its informing. It definitely has its helpful dynamics, but it also means a lot for a lot of different people. And yeah, it shows up differently for folks who may look at that and say, well, I don't know if I can align myself with that because that wasn't my experience when I sought out justice, right?
Yeah.
It just wasn't that. And then, yeah, and I think you have to be realistic about faces of that movement. These are people who have resources, who have different things that are attributed to them. So I think there's a lot there, but I think, again, you have to center it back to what the survivor wants to do, because does looking like outing someone online, right? What does that look like for a 14-year-old girl in Baltimore City who has to go to school every day after that, right? Like, what does that look like for a young boy who is on a sports team and is speaking out about being sexually assaulted, right? Like, what does that look like for folks who have to still live their lives?
What do you wish people knew about intimate partner violence?
It really has to be that it really does affect everyone. The reason why the CDC categorizes it as a public health issue is because it connects to everything. I know personally, I identify as a secondary survivor of intimate partner violence. And for those, again, who are not familiar with that terminology, that means someone who was exposed to intimate partner violence, possibly in their home, but they weren't directly affected, but they were essentially exposed to it ongoingly in a setting. And my experience was actually seeing like a male being abused by a woman. And I think that, like growing up with that dynamic and then getting into this work and saying, and then everyone saying, oh no,
women.
Yeah, women
yes.
are the ones who are
white cisgender women only.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm like, wait, that wasn't necessarily my experience, right? So yeah, like an intimate partner going for both, but still seeing those dynamics play out, right? And I think that is really what I would love for people to take the approach that not only this is not just something that we see on television, it is not something that we just hear, the little these verbal encounters in public settings. It is really something that affects everyone. When you talk about justice, right, you thinking about the survivor who's experienced it. You're thinking about the community members who are supporting that survivor. People may not want to think about this, but think about the perpetrator and then the family and friends of that person and the shame and guilt that they're also experiencing. So like everyone is affected by this. And again, we want to stay focused on centering the survivor, but knowing that them being at the center, there are a number of folks that surround them and are also feeling the effects of what they've endured.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this episode does drive that home because this song is not about a cisgender woman. The friend of the singer in Palehound is not a cisgender woman. So trans, non-binary, we're keeping them in our hearts. And yes, it affects everyone, and it can play out in different ways depending on
Yeah.
the community. And I totally hear what you're saying about depending on what community you're from, your version of justice might look a little different depending on your relationship with the legal system or police or, the state.
Yeah.
So hopefully this next question is fun, but it might actually be it might really anger you. I don't know.
Let's see.
I'm a punk rocker. I'm all about anger. That's fine. Which word from the violence prevention world is the most annoying for you to see misused on the internet?
Definitely gaslighting.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
for sure.
yes.
Yeah,
I think that's mine
gaslighting.
too.
Yeah, gaslighting for sure. Let me be clear. It's a serious tool of manipulation and mental abuse, which in turn has this emotional abusive dynamic. So when it's so constantly used in a way, misused, it just loses its value, unfortunately. And that's the main thing. It's not like people can say, they'll say what they'll say, but the more that we use it, it loses the actual impact of how it's actually used, especially in intimate partner violence relationships. So
yeah. So for the record, what is gaslighting? For real. What is it for real?
Okay. So gaslighting, I guess the most simple way to put it is making someone believe that they are crazy for believing something that is absolutely true. Right. It's a buildup. Like people get you into that place where they're able to say things that you absolutely are going to take as a matter of fact and truth because they've already laid the groundwork of diminishing your intuition, of diminishing your intelligence, diminishing your knowledge and your knowingness of a particular topic. So it's definitely like this groundwork dynamic of making someone not believe in themselves in order to be able to kind of tell them anything in turn for them to be compliant to whatever you're trying to get this person to do for you.
Yeah. So it's not just you're saying something I don't like.
Yeah, it's definitely not
or
that.
you disagree with me about something, therefore you're gaslighting me. Yeah. It's not
and
that.
it's very repetitive too. So I think that's the way that it's been. It can be repetitive again because of that groundwork that is laid. So I think that's the other thing about the misuse is that usually it's like it's a one-off incident, and then they're like, this is and this is what you've been doing, type of thing.
Yeah. And all of that is why anyone can find themselves a victim of IPV is because you don't go on the first date and immediately start getting gaslit or hit or anything.
Yes.
Like it's a slow and steady process to chip away at your self-confidence and your social circle, your support circles. So, and then, oh, wait a second, I'm in an abusive relationship.
Yes,
but it can take
absolutely.
forever for you to realize that that's what's happened. And that's why anyone, no matter how strong or brave or smart they are, like it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I always note to people, just think about if I'm in front of an audience and I'm like, this is not landing. I love to leave them with the thought of just like, think about the relationship you stayed in just a day too long. Right? Like just think about the relationship, the codependency you felt to someone, like just think about those things. And it probably was no indication of abuse happening there, but you just knew the relationship should end. Now think about that when someone has manipulated you. Think about that when someone has been physically aggressive towards you. Think about that when someone has withhold sex from you, or has taken away your power to make decisions about your sexual activity. And think of like, that's how easy it is to get to be in a situation as such, because it's just like, we all have something that we held on to a little longer than we knew that we should have. So like, again, centering it around this person's experience and how they're seeing things and just offering, how can I be of help?
Well, that is a wonderful place to leave it. Thank you so much, Angelis, for sharing all this great information with us so we can help our friends and maybe also see our way out of it if it happens to us.
Yeah.
Local to me folks should follow TurnAround on all socials. They're usually at turnaround_Inc. And program their phone number or text helpline into your phone in case you need it. I mean, honestly, that's just good general safety planning, right? Save the numbers of your local IPV centers, your shelters, suicide hotlines, crisis text lines, etc. So you and anyone you encounter can get some advice during a tough time right at your fingertips when you need it. Anything else, Angelus?
We're also on LinkedIn too, if you're interested in that.
Maybe they're hiring people. Come on, help, do the work, put your money where your mouth is. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for all of the work you do.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Angelus. And of course, Elle from Palehound. And thank you, listener, for getting through what could be a very tough episode for most. And it is not lost on me that this will likely be released around International Women's Day. So I've either had a really great on-theme accident, timing-wise, or I've made a terrible mistake. Help me make up for it by checking out all the resources in the show notes. Take everyone's good advice as far as helping folks learn bystander intervention and de-escalation techniques, learn self-defense. I don't know, maybe from First Defense Krav Maga, sponsor shout out. But, arm yourself with knowledge so you can confidently help people in any situation. And don't forget self-care after listening to this. A bath, move your body, drink some tea, pet a furry friend, listen to Sati or Beyonce, whatever works for you. But yeah, a heavy episode. Because like we heard earlier, this shit affects everyone. It's a heavy episode. You heard all the stuff. So let's lighten it up a little bit. What word or concept getting misused on the internet annoys you the most? Not even IPV related, right? And I say this fully aware, yes, of course, language changes. Slang comes and goes. And we're not trying to reinforce any classism or racism or ageism, and we avoid letting our dumb personal opinions negatively affect others by keeping it to our fucking selves most of the time. But damn if it isn't fun to vent sometimes. So what gets your goat? Tell me in the comments or message me and I'll commiserate with you. Or if you're a language buff, tell me your favorite misuse or uncommon use of a word or phrase. I'd love to hear it. I'll tell you mine. Buy me a beer next time you see me, and I will go off on this unfiltered for hours. But personally, I hate insults that involve slang for body parts. Other than asshole, of course, because everyone has one. Keep listening to hear the song Killer by Palehound. And you can support this podcast by liking my YouTube channel and sharing, subscribing, and reviewing But Her Lyrics wherever you get your podcasts. It's free and it helps. To find episode transcripts or to find out more about what I do, my book, my trainings, my Patreon, head to shawnapotter.com. And to learn about all things War on Women, head to our link tree at linktree.ee/waronwomen. Thanks for listening. Up next, Killer.